Welcome to Family Matters. This month we are talking to Gary Steele tonight about the unique challenges that face teenagers today. And we're living in a time that's unlike anything else that's been seen in the history of mankind, well, I reckon anyway. Our children and our teens are absorbing the worst of it through their school and university and peer pressure. So tonight, Gary has an information-packed session that is going to help us understand some of those challenges and the impact that they can have in the lives of our teens. And what he's going to do is to encourage us to open up conversations with teens and with each other as we navigate through these testing years in the world we live in. So that's what's happening tonight. Welcome, Gary. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, Gary, teenagers and teenage issues, challenges that face teens. What was it that set you looking at this subject?
Okay, well, a couple of things. I've been reading a fair bit of stuff on gender dysphoria and watching YouTubes on it and so on, and I pretty well moved on from that when I was tuning into a Jordan Peterson program or episode or whatever he calls
Podcast.
He was interviewing someone, and I'm a bit of a fan, I must confess, but by no means agree with a whole lot of what he says. But nevertheless, so he does strike a chord on a number of points, and I think he's fairly accurate with his academic quotations. And he made this throwaway comment of how that girls have more negative emotions than boys post-puberty, and that studies have shown that prior to puberty, emotional negativity is about equal in boys and girls, but immediately they hit puberty, the girls spike on emotional negativity in respect to themselves. And this fascinated me, and so I went off to do some research on it and found some papers that supported this very fact. So that's and where we're going with this, the end of all of it, is basically to say, are we doing enough in educating girls around this transition period from girlhood to womanhood and the challenge that they're likely to face? We're pretty good at the biology. Year 4 in Australia, anyway, girls get an education on what they can expect from menstruation and so on. And these are 10-year-olds, so 10-year-olds getting told that, and it's appropriate. It's appropriate because kids are maturing earlier and so on. And I've got only praise for what I know of what the schools do. But I don't think they tell them about the emotional changes they're going to experience as they go through this period. And there's a high correlation between depression, anxiety, and so on, and proneness to anorexia, and those cutting and bulimia and that sort of thing, and these negative emotions.
So why do you think girls are more vulnerable than boys? Why do you think there's a lot more likelihood for girls to be in that sort of situation than a boy?
Yeah. Look, I don't know. Nobody knows. It's just how it is. One of the things that our world doesn't really want to come to terms with is the fundamental that boys and girls are different. And there was some horrific experiments made, 50 years ago, trying to say that a man and a woman were completely the same, apart from their genitalia, but in everything else they were the same. They could do the same. They could be the same. And some shocking experiments were undertaken, which were frauds. And the basic wiring of the female is different to the male. It's as simple as that. Now these negative emotions, I'm sure, can be exacerbated by other factors, such as conditioning and nature and nurture, the old nature and nurture thing. But in the studies that I've looked at, this is certainly the ones to do with eating disorders and so on, where they conducted these self-report analysis of the folk involved. The girls were much higher on negative emotions. That's just the way they are. And according to Jordan Peterson, that negative emotion stays with them for life.
Oh, really?
Okay.
And this, and I invite the women listening to challenge that by all means. And of course, this is where I have to make some qualifications. Obviously, I'm not talking from a professional or a person of capacity here. I'm just someone who's read the literature, listened to the story, and I'm concerned about it, and I want to share it and get out more intelligent people and more capable people talking about it. The fact is, however, the big qualification is, of course, not every woman is more emotionally negative than every man, clearly. But in these particular studies, with the subjects involved, the girls came out more prone to negative emotions about themselves than the boys. Now, if you like, I can just walk you through some of the data on that, unless you've got another question you want to ask before I do that.
Yeah, that's
okay. So I'll just walk you through. Some, and I'll just try and pick the eyes out of this so you don't all lapse into a coma. Okay, so first of all, let me just quickly run through some normal behaviours of teenagers, right? So normal behaviour of teenagers, according to the internet, is sometimes they tell lies because they fear the consequences of their behaviour if they don't tell lies. Sometimes they tell lies because it's easier than telling you the truth. Teenagers are prone to arguing. They're prone to defiance. They're prone to an awkward phase where their behaviours are more introspective, and many teens go through this awkward phase of a period where they don't like themselves, they don't think they're good at anything, they don't have any friends. And according to the internet data I got this from, that's apparently completely normal for all teens to feel that at some point. They have a tendency to abandon commitments that they undertake. They have a tendency to withdraw from their family during puberty and so forth, form close relationships with people outside. They develop what some people would call a bad attitude, temper tantrums and things like that, impulsivity, and so on. And they sometimes struggle academically. They also violate their curfews and so on. So these are considered to be normal behaviours of teenagers.
Having had four teenagers, we could say that, yes, that's certainly normal behaviour.
You can relate to some of those, yeah. Well, I had four as well, and Sandy tells me that's what they were like some of the time. I wasn't always around, unfortunately. But the things I wanted to carry forward are this awkward phase. I think that's really interesting. How they don't feel good about anything or their friends, they don't have any friends and so on. And then plus that with the attitude and impulsivity, and you have a problem. Now, the other thing I just want to park before we go into this next bit is that studies have shown that the teenage brain is not very good at decision making. It's quite underdeveloped in the area of decision making, but it's quite developed in the area of knowing what feels good. So there's a high appreciation of of emotional responses to pleasure, but not a good response to rational thinking and decision making, which is why they make a lot of decisions that are not in their best interest. In fact, some studies claim that when they're 10 years old, they'll make better rational decisions about important issues than they can when they're 16.
Oh, right.
Which is kind of interesting. And then they talk about what they call hot cognitions versus cold cognitions. So a hot cognition is when they've got to make a decision under emotional circumstances. So they're at a party and people are handing around alcohol or worse, and the teen is being encouraged to join in and be like everybody else and drink this, whatever it is. And that's a real challenge for them, and I really struggle with that. Whereas put them in a classroom and ask them to work out the pros and cons of consuming alcohol, their rational brain will click in and will work more effectively there. The problem is that their rational brain doesn't function so well under what they call hot conditions. Okay, so that's a bit of normal stuff for girls.
So you're saying under pressure they don't make such great decisions.
No,
is that right?
No, they don't. They don't, and they'll take risks. They'll take risks, and they'll act impulsively. Now, all teenagers will do all of these things. Okay, so when it comes to this emotional negativity, I'll just read you a statement and I'll explain it. So in this study I was looking at, adolescent boys scored significantly higher than adolescent girls in frequency of positive emotions, secondary control, engagement, coping, positive thinking, cognitive restructuring, and acceptance, while girls scored significantly higher than boys in frequency of negative emotions, difficulty identifying emotions, difficulty describing emotions, primary control, engagement, coping, problem solving, emotional regulation, emotional expression, wishful thinking, involuntary engagement responses, rumination, and impulsive action. That's a bit of a mouthful, but just let me walk you through what some of those mean. Secondary control, engagement, coping. Now, secondary control, I'm informed, is our ability to adjust to a changing circumstances. So there's a time in our life, if you look over life, when you'll realise you're not going to be the jet fighter pilot you aspired to when you were 11. There's a time in your life, and if you didn't aspire that high, there's a time in your life when you realise you've pretty well come to the end of your career trajectory such as it is, and you accept it, you adjust to it, you cope with it. Now, the same thing applies in the adolescent years. A boy, generally speaking, is more likely to involve a secondary engagement coping strategy in which he will say, okay, she dropped me, probably dodged a bullet anyway, probably wasn't going to work, and he will figure out a way of dealing with it. Now, it doesn't mean he's not hurt, but nevertheless, secondary control engagement is what that is. It's the way you rationalise, if you like, the circumstance you've experienced. Girls are not so good at that as boys are. Boys are better at positive emotions, positive thinking, and restructuring and accepting of circumstances, whereas the girls don't do that so well. Right, and also so there's secondary control and primary control. So primary control is where you are trying to change your world to fit you. You know, so getting ready to apply for a job, and you've got your resumes in order, and you're going to influence the person to give you the job. That's primary primary control or engagement. And the secondary is, oh, well, I didn't get the job, but I probably would have liked it anyway, and I'll try again for another one. Boys are better at that than girls are. Now, the point about that is it increases, in my view, increases the girl's vulnerability, because we all desire security and significance in our lives, right? So we want to feel secure, we want to feel significant, not very significant necessarily, but we want to feel significant in someone's eyes. And typically teenagers look for their peers for that. So they want to believe that the group they're in, they're secure in the group, and they want to believe that they're valued in the group, boys and girls alike. We know, though, that when in girl groups, the way they manage themselves and the way they behave is quite different to boys. Boys tend to be more roughhousing, more put-downing, but they also have this ability to look after the little guy, the weedy guy, and stand up for him. Whereas in the girl groups, if a girl gets ostracized in a group and feels like she's not valued, doesn't have any significance, then that cuts very deep for her, and it makes her vulnerable to someone else coming along suggesting that maybe she should think of alternative ways of finding significance in life. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it's this idea of vulnerability that got me thinking that wouldn't it be good if we said to girls in particular, not excluding boys, but girls in particular, hey, you're 12 years old, or you're 11 years old. In time, you're going to have some doubts about yourself. You're going to think you're not going to fit in so well. You might struggle finding friends, and for a mother to share this, and maybe some of you already do this, for a mother to share this, or an older sibling to share it, can help girls navigate this brief period in their life.
That's really good advice because so often, as you said earlier, the advice, well, particularly from school, will come in the physical things. You're going to have a period, you're going to change shape, blah blah blah. But that emotional turmoil and the fact that you'll find you'll have no friends or whatever, I think most people, well, I know our girls probably weren't prepared for.
Yes, yeah, and so you imagine the rejection. And look, sometimes the rejection is only perceived. I can remember circumstances in young ladies close to me, no names, who come home really upset that a girlfriend had forgotten their birthday or something, or wasn't talking to them or whatever. And I remember one night in particular, about 8:30 at night, one of the girls who was being criticised knocked on the door with a present for the offended party, who knew nothing about how upset she was, but it was a great illustration of how the girl who was upset was not implementing those secondary control skills of thinking, well, maybe she's busy, maybe she forgot, maybe whatever, but instead jumped to rejection and no friendship and all that kind of thing.
Mm.
All right, so I looked at a couple of other studies that talked about peer influence as well, and I don't think it is. Oh, just one last thing. One of the things that girls do more than boys is ruminate and engage in wishful thinking to try and deal with whatever it is that's going on for them. And this idea of this idea of rumination is just going over and over all the negative things about themselves. And so this becomes a building kind of experience in their life where they devote time to just ruminating on what's wrong.
As a girl, yes, I'm hearing it there, Gary.
Hang on, sorry, that was... Hang on. What was that?
As a girl, yes, I can agree with you on that.
Oh, good. Is that all you agree with so far?
Good rehearsing, yeah.
Yeah. Is that the only bit I've got right now?
No, you're doing well. Carry on.
All right, okay.
I would expect social media would be a really big driver of that too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole thing about likes, on social media, I see that as terribly damaging. And the way girls count the likes, and boys too. I'm sure I can't speak for boys. I'm not on social media myself. I don't have a clue. But I know that even some fairly mature ladies in my acquaintance will notice how many likes they got on one picture versus another picture, or who in the family didn't like it or did like it, and so on. And I don't know that that's particularly damaging in the case I've got in mind. But I can see how terribly damaging it is for teenagers. And I've seen a few little studies of this where, one girl gets one like and another girl gets 100, and one gets 100, and one gets 100 and another gets 500. So the 100, that doesn't count. And just so it goes on, I think it's a terribly destructive thing. But just on that point, where we're going with this is the stages that perhaps could contribute to gender dysphoria coming out in some individuals.
So what is gender dysphoria? Can you just explain that?
Yeah, I will, and I will give you the textbook definition. Well, actually, this is, I need to just say, my eyes were open to this whole gender dysphoria thing from reading Abigail Schreier's book called Irreversible Damage. It was amazing. And also, you can see her interviewed by Jordan Peterson on YouTube, and it's well worth listening to what she's got to say. But let me just say, absolutely right up front, there are absolutely genuine cases of gender dysphoria. Now, this is a definition from Schreier's book. It is severe and persistent discomfort on one's biological sex. Typically begins in early childhood, ages 2 to 4, though it may grow more severe in adolescence. But in most cases, nearly 70% childhood gender dysphoria resolves. Historically, it afflicted a tiny slither of the population of less than 0.1%, and it was almost exclusively boys. All right, so gender dysphoria, as it was known, was typical in boys under 6 years of age, and in nearly 70% of cases it resolved. Now, it might resolve into homosexual behaviour or heterosexual behaviour, and in some cases it would continue on to gender changes or gender surgery or intervention of some kind or other. But the incidence is incredibly low, and most of us in our lifetime would never meet one of those boys.
How long ago are you talking with this?
Okay. So let me just quote you a little bit more here. Before 2012, there were no scientific literature on girls aged 11 to 21 of ever having developed gender dysphoria at all.
So that's only 10 years ago.
Yeah. Now, let me read that again, and let's read it carefully. Before 2012, there were no scientific literature on girls aged 11 to 21 ever having developed gender dysphoria at all. Now, that means that there may have been literature on girls who were younger than 11, right? Or they just couldn't find any literature on girls generally. But that's not likely to be the case. I would say definitely there were girls with genuine gender dysphoria in the young age group, like as little girls. But between the ages of 11 to 21, up until 2012, there was no scientific literature of girls ever having gender dysphoria at all. In the last decade, the Western world has seen a sudden surge in adolescents claiming to have gender dysphoria and self-identifying with transgender. Okay, so to give you some idea of the statistics around this kind of thing, take in Australia, in a Melbourne hospital, there was one case in 2003 and 200 cases in 2023. In the Tavistock Institute in the UK, there were 200 cases between 2011 and 2012, and Tavistock was a place dedicated to gender transition. But in 2016 to 2017, there were 2,000 cases.
Okay.
In Sweden.
Do you think this is because there is more reporting on this sort of thing now?
No. Well, you have to. Well, there's certainly more reporting of it because there are more people declaring it and coming out with it. I don't think that there were more people around, just not reported, because they go to these clinics and they get recorded. So anyone who sought help from Tavistock, for example, became a statistic. Anyone in Sweden, I'm just kind of jumping ahead of myself here a bit, but it doesn't matter. Sweden was the first country in the world to approve gender transitioning, and they did it in 1972, right? 1972, and it was covered by their medical health scheme. Now, Sweden from 2008 to 2018 had a 1,500% rise in cases. Right, in 10 years, they had a 1,500% rise in cases. And so now Sweden is putting the brakes on because they simply don't accept that these girls, and it's mostly girls between the ages of 13 and 17, they just don't believe that these girls are genuine cases. Something else is going on. They won't come out and tell you what they think it is.
So I have a question then. You said originally that most of the cases of gender dysphoria previous to 2012 were in boys, and there was what, 1% or 0.1%.
Yeah, look,
and now you've got a whole lot of teenage girls who are now the predominant thing. Why the change?
Okay, let me read you a quote from Schreier's book, quoting an expert in this sort of stuff. Just excuse me. Okay, so get a bit of light on the subject here. Okay, but the phenomena sweeping teenage girls is different. It originates not from traditional gender dysphoria, but in videos found on the internet. It represents mimicry inspired by internet gurus, a pledge taken with girlfriends, hands and breath held, eyes squeezed shut. For these girls, trans identification offers freedom from anxiety's relentless pursuit. It satisfies the deepest need for acceptance, the thrill of transgression, the seductive lilt of belonging. Right? Now, it's shocking to me to find that, according to Schreier and others, by no means is it only Schreier, to find that there are gurus on the internet who actively applaud and encourage this transition process. There are also gurus on the internet who actively encourage cutting and anorexia, and they've got cute names for it, and they celebrate kids doing this kind of self-harm stuff. They call it non-suicidal self-injury. And the screaming irony of all this is, to me, is if a kid was to go into a psychiatrist and say, look, I've got these great scars on the inside of my thighs, on the inside of my arms, and I'm running out of space as a cut. You got any suggestions? You know, the psychiatrist would be duty bound to put them into some kind of treatment. Or anorexia, can you help me lose more weight? I hate my body, and they're pencil thin already. The psychiatrist would be in extreme trouble. But if a 12-year-old child walks into a psychiatrist and says, I think I'm a boy in a girl's body, he will say, well, that's wonderful. Congratulations. You finally found yourself. What can we do to help? And the kid will say, well, I'd like some testosterone. And I'd like a pathway to or some puberty blockers, or a pathway to a double mastectomy. Up until fairly recently, the doctor would have to be, if not encouraging, at least neutral, because he's required to affirm and care. Now, most doctors and most clinics will say, okay, there's going to be a 2-year period here. We're going to work out what you really want. That's in theory. But there are a number of whistleblowers amongst these clinics that have come out and said that's just not followed. They don't follow their own protocols. They put the kids on puberty blockers. They line them up for testosterone and cross-sex hormone therapy, and with no qualms at all. And if you fast forward a bit and say, okay, so what you're saying is a kid goes in 15 years of age now, not 12, 15, 16 years of age, and says, I want a double mastectomy, then they're not going to push back, you know. So you can't starve yourself and you can't cut yourself, but if you want to cut your breasts off and chuck them in the bin, you can. And Sraya makes a really interesting point about breasts in her book. She said when she was 15, she didn't see much use for breasts either, frankly. She was a sporty kind of girl and they kind of got in the way. She didn't really appreciate them until she nursed her first child.
Yeah.
You know. Now these girls at 15 years of age are making decisions and getting double mastectomies and taking all these hormone things which are irreversible. And I don't believe that all of them actually know what they're doing. I think they're caught up in a contagion. And that's,
as you said earlier, they haven't got that proper decision making, the consequence part of their brain hasn't developed.
And they should at least be given some space for some proper counselling. But of course, you know, the legislation out now is that doctors have got to affirm. And so no psychiatrist who wants to stay in his job and wants to go home in peace at night is going to start putting brakes on this because as soon as he does, he's going to be on the front page of the local newspaper. Now, some doctors, in fairness, I have to say, some doctors are starting to push back, you know, in various parts all over the world. As I said, Sweden is really putting the brakes on. They're putting the brakes on hormone therapy, they're putting the brakes on puberty blockers, and they're way slowing down surgical intervention, way slowing it down.
So you said previously that Sweden was the first place to start allowing.
Yeah. Look, I can remember. That's right. I can remember Sweden because it was all in the news back in the 70s. Because Sweden was the ultra liberal country on the planet. You know, they approved homosexuality and gay rights and all that kind of thing well before everybody else. They were the front runners in this stuff. But they're not pushing back at it for any reasons other than this is dangerous. You know, we don't know the long-term effects of these drugs, and they could have known if they wanted to check. They've been doing it since 1972, but there just weren't enough people out there complaining. But now they're starting to see the dangers of these drugs. And there's a DVD or a YouTube out there called "What Is a Woman," which is well worth watching. You've got to do it on the Daily Wire, I think, but it's an amazing story where you've got in this one particular case a man who transitioned to a woman and talking. He was genuinely gender dysphoric. No one would doubt that. But he's shortened his lifespan by at least 15 years. He's got various forms of cancer. These drugs do terrible things to your body. They're the sort of drugs that you know, that people take when they're going through cancer therapy and similar things. I'm talking here about drugs that induce menopause, for example, which some girls take, and there are side effects to this. And on that same video, this same woman draws attention to the fact that in America, at least, there are 5 hospitals dedicated to gender surgery. Now, once you get the dollar involved in these things, there's a lot of powerful reasons why, from the medical profession's point of view, they don't want people turning these kids off the track they're on.
Can I just go back one and just ask another question? Just back a step for a moment. Can a boy really be trapped in a girl's body, or a boy or a girl be trapped in a boy's body? Is that right? Yeah.
I have to say, according to the scientists, yes, they can. There is. I think it would be wrong for us to say there is no such thing as gender dysphoria. It's all make believe, product of you know, adolescent girls in the main. That wouldn't be right to say. I think that the evidence is there that there are a minority of boys who wake up, they think they're in the wrong body. But do note, though, 70% of it resolves. So you know, if you went back...
How do you mean by it resolves?
Well, they stop thinking they're a girl in a boy's body, and they come out as gay, or they become heterosexual, or they continue to dress as girls, cross-dress. They do lots of different things. But I'm not saying they're happy, and I'm not saying they're not deserving of sympathy and care and so forth. They're a very small minority, and they're no relationship whatever to what we're talking about here tonight, which is this phenomena of teenage girls.
Yeah. I just wanted to get that clear before we carried on too far. That yes, there are people that.
Yeah, I think it would be wrong to
genuine issue. Yeah, but there are also a lot that are taking up the trend.
Yeah, let me give you read you a typical the way this kind of works out. So there's this Dr. Littman who Schreier quotes, who did a lot of study on this, and of course the tragedy of this whole business has become so political that academics are reluctant to open up. And many academics who've done really good work in this area long before it became a craze as it is now, really good balanced scientific work in this area, when they published their data and started talking about it, they were hounded out of their jobs. And they were treated appallingly because the institutions that they were working in wouldn't stand up to the minority of persecutors out there who were politicizing the whole thing. And so these academics went underground. And this Dr. Littman, a woman, she says this about the way it works. She says this, in 2016, natal females, so a natal female is a biological woman, accounted for 46% of all sex reassignment surgeries in the United States. A year later, it was 70%. Right? Eventually, Dr. Littman discovered websites where patients were describing what they could become. To her, a familiar pattern. So this is how it works. A daughter with social struggles and anxiety, but no manifestation of gender identity issues in childhood, enters high school. She falls in with a group of friends in which many of the kids come out as transgender. The daughter makes a similar announcement about herself, then her mental health worsens. They didn't find their true selves and flourish, Dr. Littman recalls from the parents' reports she read. The daughters became more angry and sullen and hostile to the parents. The more they suffered dysphoria, the more they pulled away from the people who might help. So the point that Littman and others make is that girls are in this vulnerable situation. They have anxiety. They have this negative emotion charging around in their heads. They don't feel connected. They don't feel accepted. They fall in with transgender kids that are already in the school, or they listen to a presentation by a transgender at the school, because this happens all the time, and they think, that's me. And so they sign up and go down this pathway. Now, let me just, if I can, just on the, so I think I've made the point about social media. Social media has a lot to answer for in this. It really does. It's just terrible. You're probably aware that some time ago there was a flurry in the news about platforms like Instagram trying to bring pressure there and to stop kids putting up pictures of their cuts, because kids were egging each other on by showing their scars, and this was creating this competition among kids to cut more dramatically and more spectacularly and so on. And the medical profession and parents got on. I don't know what was done. I think some of the things were taken down, but it's this kind of contagion or craze, if you like, that is at work here, except that no one's blowing the whistle on it except for these minority people who write books the support groups for all this stuff try and have taken off the shelf, so try and have banned, and so on. Okay, now what was I going to say? I was going to share something with you. Oh yeah, so the bit I found particularly disturbing about this. So I think we've covered a bit about peer pressure. Peer pressure is enormous in this area, just like it is in other areas like bulimia and anorexia in particular is a big peer pressure thing. And
especially, as you said before, where the girls are particularly emotionally vulnerable to.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, again, we're not excluding boys from this, right? What we're saying is that girls more than boys are subject to negative emotions, ruminations, and general negative ways of managing with life's disappointments, and therefore I'm suggesting that they are more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? So this is what the gurus say. The gurus advocating trans behaviour. If you think you might be trans, you are. Trying out trans, binders are a great start. Testosterone is amazing. It may just solve all your problems. If parents loved you, they would support your trans identity. If you're not supported by your trans identity, you'll probably kill yourself. Deceiving parents and doctors is justified if it helps transition. You don't have to identify as the opposite sex to be trans. Now, just I invite you to just absorb the last one. You don't have to identify as the opposite sex to be trans.
Okay.
Now, when you look into this, what you find these people who are neither male nor female. They are collecting people of like mind, and they don't go in for all the terrible surgery necessarily. They don't disfigure their bodies so much. They identify in this new world called trans, queer, or whatever it is they call themselves. Now I find that really disturbing. You know, I could understand if a person honestly feels that they're a boy in a girl's body, you know, and they will go all the way, and they'll try and have a male genital organ created for them. Won't work very well, but they will do it. But only 12% of people who undertake surgery go for that option. It's very, very low of all the people who go in for surgery of some kind or another. So what you're ending up with is something that is neither male nor female. It's this transposition. And of course, I am very skeptical
about. Does that mean that they take all sorts of hormones to block everything?
Well, they'll take the drugs that create the body that they want. So I look at some of these trans. So it's a girl who's trans to something. She doesn't look like a boy. She hasn't gone as far as growing whiskers. We don't know if she's had top surgery, as they call it. She certainly looks different, but she looks fairly attractive in her little model of the world, and she's encouraging others to follow her. But those others don't know how far she's gone. Look, I'll give you an example. One of my grandchildren has a headmistress who is gay, and they had a child, and the partner was supposed to be trans, like a woman transing to a male, but she was able to breastfeed. Now that means she hadn't taken all the drugs. She hasn't done any of this sort of stuff. She was just pretending to appear like a bloke and declare herself to be trans male. I found that astonishing because this teacher is all about trans and work out whether you think you're a boy or a girl when you're 5 years of age, and some of these other terrible things that the educationalists are doing. So I find these things very subtle And in America in particular, or not just America, but there are scripts you can get on how to con the doctor into believing you've always been trans, so you'll get the testosterone you want or the puberty blockers that you want. In Australia, the legislation is such that you cannot try and talk a child out of this if it's going to do them harm. So a really dodgy kind of law to try and understand, actually.
Yeah.
So you might be able to dissuade them a little bit, but as soon as they complain about you, then they'll throw you in jail.
Yeah. So with that sort of circumstance, are there any medical safeguards in place for my 15-year-old who decides they want to change their gender?
Well,
they don't come and see me. They go straight to the doctor or the counsellor or whatever. Is there anything there that's going to slow the process?
Yeah, in Sweden, they won't stick you on drugs. Now, in Sweden, you'll have to go through a long, drawn-out process. In Australia, in Australia, I wouldn't want to see any kid go to a physician in Australia about gender dysphoria at the moment. Now, there is some pushback. There was an item in the ABC News the other night where somebody was complaining that the doctor in a clinic was slowing down the journey to transition. And he's now the worst person in the world for doing that. But he's just exercising sound medical sense. And he probably in his heart doesn't believe that this person is genuinely gender dysphoric. In his heart, he probably thinks he's just caught on to the bandwagon. Now, of course, you know, the community that supports all this, you know, gets really upset and starts petitioning and throwing placards around and doing all sorts of things at what I just said. You know, there's no freedom of speech on this subject. There's no, hey, what about we have a talk about this? You have to affirm care. And that's what the doctors do. So there are no safeguards. And if you read Schreier's book, case study after case study where parents were honestly believing they were taking their girl to a rational, professional, medically trained person who would have a proper process in line with the DSM-5 protocols, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Disease States, and that they would be subject to that, only to find out from the minute they walked in the door, the doctor was full of congratulations and what can I do to help? And so the parents would go from therapist to therapist to therapist and finally give up in despair and get on the net to find a support group that could help them. And there are such support groups on the internet.
Oh, that's good to know.
So I guess that's another question is, what do we do with all this information?
Well, okay, so what got me thinking about this, and as I say, I'm not the person to best qualified to talk about this at all, in my opinion. I think what got me wanting to talk about this is not so much the transgender stuff, but going right back to this vulnerability in girls to be caught up in crazes of one form or another. And I've been reading a book called, I'll just show you a picture of this. Hang on a second. I've been reading a book called From Paralysis to Fatigue by a man named Edward Shorter, who is a medical historian who traces psychomatic illnesses from the 18th century to the 21st century and illustrates in a most powerful way how we as a society get caught up in latest craze type things. You know, like for example, at the moment, you'll hear more people diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder than you've ever thought possible in your life. Now, that doesn't mean they're not suffering from PTSD. Some of them definitely are, but it just gets handed out. The patients expect the diagnosis. The doctors know the diagnosis will help the patient. They probably don't accurately diagnose whether or not they have PTSD. It's just out there, so much of it around. Chronic fatigue is another one that comes out all the time. And so we have these trends, and gender dysphoria is seen by some as the same kind of thing, as a craze that's just going around, that's afflicting these girls, taking nothing away from the genuine cases. And there may be genuine cases amongst some of these girls, but the Swedes are saying 1,500% increase in 10 years. I don't think so. All in the same age group, all 13 to 17? I don't think so. And they've got the courage to say it.
Yeah. So in a way, a lot of this is about identity. What do you think the Bible tells us about our identity? You know, what does the Bible say about this?
Well, ultimately, our identity is in Christ, isn't it? That's where we end up. We have nothing. We have no security or significance other than in Christ. And in Christ, we have absolute security and significance on that front. The Bible only knows male and female, and the Bible only knows the respective roles designed from the beginning. However, you can ask yourself, what was behind the law that said women should not dress in men's clothing? And you could wonder about that verse in the light of gender dysphoria. We also got to recognise that male and female were created very good in the beginning, but we're no longer very good. You know, we're very complicated, we're very disease-ridden, we're genetically malformed, we carry forward all sorts of terrible diseases from generation to generation, and psychologically as well as philologically or physiologically. So it's reasonable that some of the chromosomes get mucked up and things don't turn out the way they should.
Mm.
And we should deal with compassion with people who have this problem whilst maintaining the scriptural position.
Yeah. So could you speak to the concerned parents and grandparents who are listening now? Or what can they do, or how can they help support their children in the environment they're in? We're in a horrible environment.
Yeah.
You know, as far as living a Christian life goes.
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer because I just don't have the expertise for that. But first of all, we've got to recognise that most kids won't have this problem, right? Most kids won't. Yeah, that's a reality. But at the same time, we're a people of the one, not the many. You know, we follow the Lord's example of the lost sheep, one. So we don't want not even one. You know, we can't just say, oh well, that was just one. We have to consider that the whole could be the one. So, but nevertheless, it's most likely not to be happening. But the thing that I find important is to be talking about this kind of thing within earshot of children and letting them hear us talk about it, not dramatically, not carrying on, but just calmly and rationally talking about it. And I found with one of my grandchildren in particular, who has a toe on the spectrum, and spectrum kids are very vulnerable to this, incredibly vulnerable to this. But she joins in the conversation and she tells what's going on at school and she reports, and a younger sister follows suit. And so they are building a resistance to the propaganda, and they are self-reinforcing their own identity by doing that. And so by listening and asking questions rather than lecturing, you encourage teenagers to talk. And as they talk, they learn what they believe. And when we ask them the right questions, then they talk some more and they learn more about what they believe. Now, sometimes finding out what they believe can be a bit scary, but the soft word that breaks the bone, as the Proverbs say, you just have to work with it. So the things that grandparents have always done well, which is to empathise, to listen, to encourage, but to firmly state their own position, I think is the best we can do. But having that program about educating girls, older women educating younger women, educating teenagers on the transitions of life and sharing the experiences, I believe, is worth a try.
Yeah, which is exactly what Paul told Timothy. Get the older women to teach the younger women.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if I am hearing this right, our takeaway point is create conversations amongst ourselves and amongst our families on the challenges that are out there, and encourage people to feel more security in their identity in Christ.
That's right. And that, I think that really is the key thing. And, you know, parents who are involved in the meeting, you know, and encourage their kids to go to Bible class and their kids to be involved in young people's activity and drive that agenda, I believe are keeping their kids as safe as they possibly can. But I also think reading books like Irreversible Damage, distressing as it might be, is something we ought to do, or at least see the YouTube discussion between Peterson and this girl. And there are others out there as well. There's some excellent talks out there on this subject. And there are lots of kids who are detransitioning, you know, they change their mind. See, because it's a craze, girls will jump on this bandwagon at 13 and they jump off at 15.
Yeah.
You know?
And
they didn't do any serious damage to themselves. Been there, done that, gone. But no one keeps a record of those.
Yeah.
And what the doctors say, oh, well, they didn't qualify for the criteria. You know, well, maybe none of them do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Gary. We've really appreciated having you with us tonight. It's been a very enlightening conversation. It's not one that I particularly was looking forward to. It's a sort of hard topic, but yeah, I think you've dealt with it really, really well. So we really thank you for that.
That's
Thank you so much.
Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share the video if you thought it was interesting. See you next time, God willing.